So, dear all distinguished panelists and speakers in the room and online, welcome to this session of Tracking Global and Nordic Clean Energy Progress, hosted by Nordic Energy Research here in the Nordic Pavilion in COP28. My name is Kevin Johnsen. I'm the COO at Nordic Energy Research, and I will be your moderator today. Nordic Energy Research is an institution for joint energy research and policy cooperation under the Nordic Council of Ministers. The aim of our work includes increasing cooperation on sustainable forms of energy, stimulating the development of new competitive energy solutions, and supporting the Nordic region's green transition to carbon neutrality. On the tables around, you can find a postcard with information about how you can connect with us and stay updated on our work. In 2021, we launched Nordic Clean Energy Scenarios. It's an energy system analysis of the Nordic region's energy systems and how the different countries can achieve the Nordic Vision 2030 to become the most sustainable and integrated energy region in the world by realizing the green transition. Since then, the landscape of the energy sector has changed rapidly. Technological developments, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and other geopolitical challenges have altered the prospect for certain technologies and conditions for the Nordic and global energy systems that have changed. Today, you will get to know more about where the world's energy systems are headed, the status for different clean energy technologies, and take a look into market developments in the Nordics and on the global scale from Viktoria, Karsberg, Rynning-Tønnesen, and Dean Cooper. With this scope, we hope to illustrate, to give you a stock take on the global and Nordic progress towards a carbon-neutral society. Which technologies and key parameters will be decisive? Where do we see progress in technology penetration? And what remain for markets to be on track for delivering on or close to the 1.5-degree targets? First up is our first speaker, Viktoria Karsberg. Let's welcome her to the stage. Viktoria has over 20 years of experience in organizations ranging from the global steel industry to international FMCG or fast-moving consumer goods companies. She has worked with IPO readiness, been a communications consultant, and also a journalist, and she has an executive MBA from Stockholm School of Economics. Today, she is the head of corporate identity and group communications at SSAB, a global steel company with the aim to be the first provider of fossil-free steel to the market. And part of that work is to tell the world about hybrid and fossil-free steel, for which we are eagerly awaiting to hear more. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Kevin. I will try to speak so that you can all hear me despite the noise coming in here. So, my name is Viktoria Karsberg, and I'm head of corporate identity and group communications at this Swedish Nordic steel company called SSAB. Just to give you a very short introduction to our company. So we have production units in Sweden, Finland, but also in the US. We're around 15,000 employees, and we're a rather small company with a production capacity of 8.8 million, but we are specialized in high-strength steels, which give us access to the global market. So we're actually present in more than 50 markets around the world. In Sweden and Finland, we have our production based on blast furnaces, and this of course means that we are emitting a lot of CO2 emissions from our production, while as in the US we're scrap-based. For a long time we thought that we were a solution to our customers, helping them to reduce the weight of their products by providing them a stronger and lighter steel. But in 2016, we realized, and also with the Paris Agreement in place, that this will not be enough. So we started on a journey together with two partners, LKAB and Vattenfall, that you might know, to find a path to fossil-free steelmaking. And in 2021, we were able to show that we had actually broken the code of how to do this. We had actually found how to make fossil-free sponge iron, which is then the raw material into fossil-free steel. And last year, we were able to provide our customers with 500 tons of fossil-free steel. And of course, this is just pilot scale still. So we are cooperating with our customers on research and development also in their part of the value chain. But I would say that this has really been the key for us in order to be able to develop this, to work with our suppliers the iron ore maker, and then also work a lot with our customers. And we start to see now that the demand for these kind of products, they are really there. So for us, it's about how quickly can we come to the market. And that is also why we have looked upon another journey when it comes to the scrap-based and recycled steel to see how we can also make that CO2-free. And this spring, we were able to launch another product called SSAB Zero, which has no emissions in Scope 1 and Scope 2. But of course, in order to be able to do this, today we stand for, as I said, 10% of Sweden's CO2 emissions. We need to transform to an electrification. That is how this process goes, using green energy, which becomes then green hydrogen, and that's how we can produce this fossil-free steel. And this will require around 10% of Sweden's electricity system. So when doing this, we really need to work hand in hand with society. I would say that is the key to succeed, and also to see what is the best energy mix, how can we continue to have a fossil-free electricity system, how can we continue to have competitive prices, and so on. So I'm looking forward to talk more about that.
Thank you so much, Viktoria. Give her an applause. So next up is, and our second speaker is Christian Rynning-Tønnesen. Welcome. Over the last 14 years, Christian has been the CEO at Statkraft, Europe's largest renewable energy producer. And before becoming a CEO at Statkraft, he was CEO and CFO at Norske Skog, an owner of paper mills and producer of publication paper. In addition to other positions in Statkraft, he has also been in McKinsey and SSAB Norge. This year is the 8th consecutive year that Statkraft has presented your low emission scenarios, an analysis of the global energy system towards 2050, and we look forward to getting to know more on where the global and the Nordic energy system might be heading. Welcome.
Thank you, and thanks for showing up. I hope this will increase your knowledge. Statkraft today is the largest producer of renewable energy in Europe. And we have geared up to be one of the largest developers of renewable energy in the world. So our plans is to construct 30 to 40 power plants per year from 2025 onwards. We will construct an equivalent amount of new renewable electricity, offsetting around 20 million tons per year of fossil emissions by 2030. That is equivalent to 40% of all the emissions from the country of Norway. So, but we do this in 21 countries and not only in Norway. The Nordic region is in a very well position for developing more renewable energy. We already have a close to emission-free renewable electricity system in Norway and Sweden, and also quite low emissions in Finland and Denmark. And combined, we have some of the best wind resources in Europe, and also both Norway and Sweden, and to some extent Finland, has hydro resources that can balance out the intermittency of the wind. So this combination of wind and hydropower makes the Nordic region unique. We are also very well connected electricity-wise. So Norway, Sweden, also Finland and Iceland have already developed most of the hydropower that we can develop, but it can still be upgraded. We could add 10 to 15,000 megawatt of more capacity, more one-way flow of energy, so to produce in a shorter while, and it can also be pump storage in Norway, and there's also a large potential in Sweden. It is needed with more green, more renewable electricity to drive the development in all other parts of society. In sectors like heating, where, for instance, heat pumps is a very effective way of heating buildings and other buildings, and gradually also in transport. However, access to resources has not been enough. That means we are struggling to get enough concessions and access to the grid. So in the Nordic region, there is enough wind, it is profitable, but we don't have access to develop it fast enough. So local acceptance and grid access is critical. Also in the Nordics, we have strong institutions, despite the fact that it should go faster than it does. It is a well-regulated system, and in order to speed up, I think the most important thing we need to do, more than already today, is to make sure that the local acceptance in communities are better than it already is, with people living close to the new wind parks, the new power lines, etc. Further, the Nordics will use green electricity to produce green hydrogen. And in Norway, we also have plans for some blue hydrogen coming from gas with CCS. And this hydrogen will be used to have a deeper decarbonization of societies than electricity alone can do. We recently conducted an in-depth study in the energy transition in Norway, and where we looked at 3 scenarios with a different level of industrial growth and speed in the energy transition. And even in a scenario where Norway does not reach our climate targets in time, and there's no industrial growth, it will still be a large growth in electricity and in hydrogen. The growth of electricity demand in Norway is forecasted to be between 30 and 90% compared to today. And to which extent this will happen, to a large extent, is dependent on the development in the energy-intensive industry. If you look at Sweden, there is a national climate target to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2045. And in order to achieve those climate ambitions, remaining fossil fuel use in the industry needs to be replaced, that we just heard about. And there is a large consensus from both the energy industry, the users in the industry, and the politicians in Sweden that there is a need for a planning target for the electricity system corresponding to 300 terawatt hours around the world by 2045. This is a doubling, roughly, of the electricity system in Sweden in just a little more than 20 years. To meet this demand, there is a need for more energy, and, as I mentioned, but also more flexibility to counterbalance the variation that comes from the wind. The electricity from a wind park is obviously only there when there is wind. And for that reason, we can upgrade our hydropower plants massively. We can even install more pump storage that can pump water up when there is abundant electricity in the system, and produce when there is a bigger need when there is little wind in Scandinavia and in Northern Europe. And in Statkraft, we have a target to upgrade 5 large power stations of this type, and we already launched one such project at a place called Mauranger in Hardanger in the west, from 250 to 880 megawatt. So more than 600 megawatts of upgrade in one project only. That is the capacity for more energy. Onshore wind from now on until 2030 and well beyond is the fastest and most cost-efficient source. But that has to depend on more local acceptance, particularly in Norway, but it is also an issue in Sweden. And when it comes to offshore wind, the costs have increased the last 1.5 years. We believe we will see a top of costs quite soon, and that will continue to come down again. Not as fast as solar energy or batteries, but still continuing on a downward trend. And the offshore wind resources outside Norway and also outside Sweden are enormous. So if we can have this technology cost efficient and combine it with a hydro system, this will be a very region very strong in renewable electricity in total. I would also like to state that the Nordic region is also unique in a global context when it comes to running a weather-dependent system. That has been the case in all countries for around 100 years. And the market models that has been used to optimize the production with weather forecasting, storage of water, wind forecasting, etc., is very advanced, and those IT system and machine learning system and artificial intelligence models that many companies, including Statkraft, know how, is also a way to trade and to sell and buy energy in other parts of the world. So Statkraft has developed this into a global model where we have a large energy trading going on in Europe and growing in South America and India. So going forward, I think that the main challenge for the energy industry is to continue with a high volume of developments like I just mentioned we are doing, where we are so large that we can cost effectively install every wind park and every solar park, to match it with more flexibility like hydropower and batteries and grid stabilization systems, and further develop the Nordic region to be continue to be one of the best places in the world for power-intensive industry and for the population living in the Nordics. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian, for this insight into the Nordic energy system. I think if you could take a seat, and then we'll continue with the next speaker. For the audience, but also for the technicians. So we will have a slight change of schedule. So we will first have Dean, then we'll have Tiffany, and then we will have 2 panels. So no need to change the chairs, and I will change the microphones during Tiffany's speech. So next up is Dean Cooper. Please welcome to the stage. You have been working with energy for over 30 years in an impressive number of countries, ranging from the UK, Brussels, South Africa, Botswana, Paris, and the Netherlands, through various positions. Today, you are the Global Energy Lead at World Wildlife Foundation, where you aim for a faster, greener, and fairer global energy transformation. And you will give us some perspectives on a just energy transformation and the links between energy and nature. Welcome.
Great, thank you very much. Can you hear me okay? Great. So before I start, I just wanted to ask you a couple of questions. So firstly, in your organization or in your home, do you think about the link between energy and climate? Yeah, I mean, just give me a hand. Do you think about that link between energy and climate? Yeah, nods. Okay, so most of us, I think about that. Okay, so the second question is, when you're using energy at your organization or at home, do you think about the link to biodiversity? Well, that's not bad, actually. That's not bad. So this is 2 or 3 out of everybody from here. So my background, as you've heard, is very much energy related. Energy, different international organizations, national organizations, private, public, and in a lot of developing countries. And trying to understand what we should be doing to try to move to clean energy supplies, because clearly that's what the world is needing. So I only moved to WWF a couple of years ago, and really only at that time did I realize that the bigger picture, where does energy fit into the global context? So what we did was to put together a sort of strategic framework, and we're looking at priorities in terms of fossil fuel phase out and energy efficiency, renewable energy. And renewable energy is not easy, because first of all, you've got to electrify in order to be able to use renewables. And there are always some industries which are very difficult to use renewables, these sort of high energy intense industries, if ceramics or steel or chemicals or some of the transport, aviation, shipping. So they're difficult areas to address. So renewables involves a lot of different activity. But we've tried to make it simple, and we say, okay, how are we going to address these issues together? We're going to do it faster, we must do it greener, and we must do it fairer. Now, when I say faster, we'll hear all the negotiations at the moment talking about, yes, we've got to look at energy transitions, and we must achieve 40 or 50% of our goals by 2030, and by 2050 we'll be net zero. And well, if you look at the weather and you look at the impacts that are going on today, do we really think we've got another 25 years in order to solve this problem? Do we think that net zero by 2050 is really going to be in time? I talk to my boys at breakfast, and they say, Dad, I haven't done my homework. I say, well, you should do your homework. And they say, why should I bother? I'm not going to have a job in the future anyway, because the world's going to be a disaster. And I'm thinking, well, how do I answer that? What do I say to these, my own sons who are giving up on life before they've started just because they hear about all of the problems with the transition? So faster is one of the key elements. Fairer, I've mentioned, and that's, you've heard a lot of the conversations about just energy transitions, transformations. We need to bear that in mind. We have to think about how we can take with us those people who are already engaged with fossil fuels. If their livelihoods depend upon fossil fuels, the supply chain to fossil fuels, they're not going to be very supportive if we say to them, sorry, your job's got to change tomorrow, we're doing something else, we want renewable energy. So we're committed to 100% renewable energy. That's our goal. But we've got to facilitate that process. And we've got to work together. And together is the critical aspect. So those people in the world that don't have energy at the moment, we can't say to them, oh, you must do it in this sort of way, because all of the problems we've caused from the north, from developed countries, now means that you have to invest your life savings in a solar panel. We've got to facilitate that process. Yes, we want solar. Yes, we want to have clean energy production, but we've got to do it in a way that's going to be sustainable, and it's got to involve the consultation with the people that we're trying to address. So energy access is part of the fairer issue, and just energy transformation is part of the fairer. Climate justice. The North has caused the problem. Why should the South pay for the problem? We need to work together. And look, this is not easy. This is not something we can say, oh, let's turn the lights off tomorrow. I've done my bit. That's enough for me. I'm saving the world by reducing my temperature from 20 degrees to 19 degrees in my house. It's going to be difficult. It's not going to be very pleasant for any of us. And we've got to start thinking, let's walk to work. Walk to work, but it's half an hour for me to walk to work. If I go in the car, it's 5 minutes. Why do I want to do that? It's raining. What should I do? We've got to start making the difference. And that applies to everybody. When I say everybody, it's the policymakers, it's the financiers, it's the implementers, it's the influencers. We need to be working together. And this is the sort of the global message. So there's lots of good activities working in different countries. And the Nordics region is an excellent region with difficult parameters to deal with. A lot of fossil fuel reserves, lots of supplies, very cost effective to make the best use of oil and gas. But that's not the future. That is not what we have to be aiming at. And we need to be working out how can we exchange that, the current status, for something which will be sustainable in the longer term. And that's what we're trying to do, is to try to influence, to try to demonstrate new ways forward, and to try to highlight some of the damage that we're all going to be responsible for unless we can work together and make a real change. Thanks.
So next up is our speaker from IEA, Tiffany. Will you come to the stage? And let's see. If we have a, Yeah, we also have some slides here as well. It's a clicker. See? This one? So Tiffany, you're from the IEA. You worked on the tracking energy technologies, and you'll give an introduction to the report. So welcome.
Thank you. Hello. Good? Okay. So thanks a lot for the introduction, and yeah, let's see if we can get my perfect first slide up there. So today I'm going to be talking about the IEA's Tracking Clean Energy Progress Report. So this is one of our annual publications where we're looking at currently about 50 different technologies, sectors, components of the energy system. We're looking across a variety of different metrics there. So this ranges from technology deployment to emissions within sectors, but also enabling mechanisms, so policy enabling kind of innovative solutions, as well as private sector actions. Then we give a rating to each of these different areas, so either green if it's on track, yellow if more progress is needed, or red if really it's not on track. And we're checking this against our net zero emissions by 2050 scenario, looking specifically at 2030 milestones. So how are we doing kind of now to meet these short-term objectives to get us on track for net zero by 2050? And so I won't be able to go through all 50 of the technologies, but we can give a summary of the range of evaluations on the different sectors. So we can see here something important to note is that we have 3 technologies that are already on track. So that's solar PV, electric vehicles, and lighting. And while that might seem like not a lot, couple important things to note are first that solar PV and electric vehicles together account for about 1/3 of emission reductions across the energy sector by 2030. So they're pulling really a high amount of weight in our net zero scenario. So these are quite important technologies to already be rated as on track. Another thing to note is this is the first year that we've evaluated solar as on track. So things are picking up, things are moving in a good direction. Now, on the other technologies, despite them being marked as more effort needed or not on track, this doesn't mean that nothing is happening in these areas. Rather, it's quite the opposite. It's just that achieving net zero emissions by 2050 requires such a massive transformation of really unprecedented scale and speed that we need to be doing a lot more in these sectors. And so the overall picture is one of positive developments in many areas, but really an acceleration needed in quite a few of the areas. And so to give a flavor of some of the different highlights, starting with a bit more about solar and EVs. These are 2 technologies where we're seeing record growth. In 2022, both showed record growth. Solar in particular had the highest absolute growth in history, and for the first time surpassed wind, and so quite significant there. We're seeing scales up in some pretty key regions, so the EU, the US, China, India, etc., and also key developments in the supply chains to be able to provide the technologies needed here. For electric vehicles as well, we're seeing record growth. 2022 had a 14% sales share and about 65% growth on the previous year, so quite significant. We need to, again, keep that growth going so that we can achieve about a 65% market share by 2030 already. And we need to expand that particularly in emerging markets as well as to other types of transport. So we're seeing good movement in passenger transport, but we need to move into buses, trucks, etc. Heat pumps is another area where we're seeing some key growth in particular markets such as the EU and the US. We're seeing, I think in 2022, it was 11% growth. We need to have about 15% growth on average per year by 2030. So we're getting close to the rate needed, but still need to keep accelerating a key technology for the building sector. Now hydrogen, so a key component of clean hydrogen, of course, will be electrolyzers. And I'm going to pull out my notes here actually for the correct numbers here. In 2022, we had 700 megawatts. This is less than what we're expecting to see this year, with more than tripling of electrolyzer deployment to 2 gigawatts. So quite good growth there, but really we need to scale this up much faster. And so by 2030, this is actually project announcements that are in the pipeline. This would take us to 400 gigawatts, which is huge growth. In our net zero scenario, we need about 550 gigawatts, so it needs to be even higher than that, but still quite on track. Now, a key point there, though, is that we need to have all of that have a financial investment decision. Right now, of the announced projects, it's only about 3% that have reached FID. So good progress, but we need to be putting really the dollars and the euros behind this as well. Another key area that we're tracking quite closely, especially recently at the IEA, is clean technology manufacturing. So looking to make sure that we have the supply chains in place. And this is from an update that was just released a week or two ago on tracking projects around the world for manufacturing. We can see that there's already a lot of production, of course, of these key technologies. For solar, wind, and heat pumps, we have between 25 and 40% of the needs in the NZD scenario by 2030 are already, we're reaching those levels of manufacturing. And from announced projects, we would have for solar, batteries, and electrolyzers, this is actually just new in our latest update for electrolyzers, would meet the 2030 needs if all projects are completed on time and in full. Now again, these need to have financial investment decisions to back them up, so still more needed there. You can see there's quite big gaps for heat pumps and wind, with some struggles in the supply chain for wind, so definitely key areas for policy attention going forward. One other key area that we're tracking really closely at IEA is innovation. So we have our, I'd suggest to check it out online, our clean technology guide. We're tracking over 550 different technology designs and components, evaluating their technology readiness, looking at what projects are going on around the world. And we've seen some key increases in technology readiness over the past few years. This is significant, especially for some of the sectors that we consider emissions hard to abate, so heavy industry and long distance transport, because a lot of the technologies that will be important to the transition are not yet in the market. They're either being piloted or demonstrated. And so with my last slide, moving to a quick picture on heavy industry, one of those hard to abate sectors. This is showing announced projects for steel production, specifically primary steel production, and for cement. And it's showing the amount of net zero or near zero emission production that's in the pipeline. So you can see it's only about around 10% for both steel and cement that is expected to be coming online. For steel, mostly hydrogen-based production. For cement, mostly carbon capture. Now you can see for steel we have another category. This is a lot of direct reduced iron plants that are intended to start with natural gas and are planning to move to hydrogen, but there's a bit of lack of clarity of how quickly and how fully they're going to be moving to hydrogen, so we can't fully count on them. So this is a key area where we need to see rapid innovation to get these technologies ready, rapid deployment, and really, again, getting the finance behind these projects. I'm going to leave it there, and we can discuss more in the panel then.
Thank you. So please just stay, and we'll also invite Dean to the stage. So please. So, the first panel, welcome. I have a question for both of you, and then you can decide who answers first. So, what would you say is the biggest change that we've seen since 2021? Are there any technologies or societal challenges or other areas where we have seen big leaps in the last 2 years?
Okay, so from my point of view, I think I mentioned earlier this whole idea of just energy, and this sort of transition. In Glasgow, at COP26, we released a report which was called Just Energy Transformation, and it was really quite a new issue. I mean, there was some organisations that were involved with the just energy work, but not very many. Now, if I come to today, at COP28, and just energy transition just transition in general is everywhere. So it feels like that's already been accepted as something we need to address. Now, having said something we need to address, it means something very different to different people. So if you're having a conversation about just energy transition, and you're half an hour into the conversation, and the other person says something that you don't expect, that's because you were talking at cross purposes. Now, what you think is a just transition is not what they think is a just transition. So it's important to understand that, and we hope the negotiators here will give us a definition of where we're going to go. From our perspective, we talk about a just energy transformation. And the intention there is that any transition is dependent very much upon local conditions. So any country, any region, any community, their method of just energy transition is going to be very different from the next community or the other country or the other region. So we've got to look at the different sorts of transitions which will be required. But there will be common principles, and that's what we've tried to pull out in terms of a global transformation. So there's one transformation that we all need to make, and that will consist of the energy transitions that are controllable in your own environment. But I think that sort of awareness of that issue is something that I would say has at least elevated. We now need to take it forward to something we can implement.
All right. Good? Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess from the IEA perspective, we picked a good year because in 2021 we released our first net zero roadmap, and we've just released an update a couple of months ago. So we've been tracking closely kind of what's changed in those past 2 years, and I'd say there's kind of two trends. The first one is to say, unfortunately, emissions have gone up, whereas in our scenario 2 years ago, we would have hoped they would have started a path more going down at this point. Now, this is partially due to really what we're seeing in the world with the energy crisis, unexpected events like the Russian invasion on Ukraine, etc. So this is, I guess, one of the less positive areas, but then in the meantime, there's a lot of positive things happening. We're seeing, as I mentioned, skyrocketing deployment of some of the key technologies, solar, EVs, etc. And we are really seeing the pipeline of projects scale up for some of the trickier areas. So announcements on hydrogen projects, carbon capture and storage projects, etc. are really skyrocketing. So really two parallel trends, both going in different directions. So we need to lean into the second one if possible to get things going in the right direction.
So following up on that, what would you say is the number one area where more attention is needed to get more energy technologies on track?
This one for me?
Yeah.
All right. So it's a tough question because I think we all know there's thousands of things that we all need to be doing and contributing to. But if I had to pick kind of one area to really focus attention on, it really is getting the transition moving in emerging and developing economies. We need to be getting it moving faster everywhere, but a lot of the deployment that we've seen, for example, since the Paris Agreement, looking at different technologies, but 85% plus has been in advanced economies as well as China. So we need to look at how we can be spreading that across the world. A few key things are key there. So finance, of course, looking at how the global community can be helping to accelerate that transition. This includes development finance and also perhaps some innovative financial mechanisms that can really help mobilize private capital. There's also a role for capacity building, looking at how we can help get the proper or the needed policy frameworks in place to support the transition all across the world would be very key.
Thank you. And you, Dean, working both in the energy sector and now at WWF, would you say that will there always be a conflict between nature conservation and energy production? And how do we manage, and if it does, how do we manage those conflicts?
Well, I guess the answer is hopefully there won't always be, and people will be aware of the link. But certainly that's something that I only realized after coming to WWF was the impact of energy applications on the natural environment. So clearly we want to transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy. And we want everything, as I said before, to be powered through renewable energy, which is going to be a challenge. But it's important for us to realize that we can do renewable energy well, and we can do renewable energy not so well. And when I say not so well, it's just about planning, siting the renewable energy. It doesn't actually make a lot of difference in a lot of cases if you move your renewable energy systems to an area that's going to have less environmental impact, like not in a conservation area, for example. We take that out. Hearing about the wind systems, and that's critical as well. It's not just on land, it's also offshore. So we've just released a position on offshore renewable energy in order to take account of the impact. So certainly from my point of view, historically, it's all been about how many gigawatt hours can you produce at what cost, and that is the business model. Now it's a little bit about, well, it's not just the cost in a financial sense, it's the cost in terms of damage to nature, to biodiversity. And I mentioned biodiversity at the beginning and asked if there's anybody aware of that. One of the first things I learned when I came to WWF was that in the last 50 years, we've had a 70% loss of biodiversity. Now, I'm just pausing there to see the reaction. That's a 70% loss of nature in 50 years. If I was a business owner and I've just been told I've made a 70% loss, well, I'd be out of business very quickly. So it's not just a climate crisis and an energy crisis, there's also a nature crisis. And I think we have to get that onto the agenda when we're talking about the way ahead for the climate. So I think so.
Thank you. Give them an applause. So, and we'll bring back Christian Rynning-Tønnesen and Viktoria Karsberg. Welcome. So, at this COP, there is a push for the world to agree on a target to triple renewable energy by 2030. Is this a goal that you support? And do you believe that it is achievable to do?
Sorry, I really didn't hear you now because it's quite loud behind me.
So there is a push to triple the production of renewable energy by 2030 at this COP. Do you think that that is something that is achievable?
Please.
It represents new electricity on the size of 11,000 megawatts in 7 years. So it is very ambitious. I mean, my company will be able to construct 20,000 or 20 out of those 11,000. And we are one of the largest developers. I would say it is a stretch target. If we turn it around and say, is it needed? Yes. But we have conflicts and there is biodiversity, there are local acceptance and fair transition elements. So you combine it all, it is challenging. But there is a risk also that we want to solve everything in one go. I mean, biodiversity, I think, needs to be taken into consideration because if we destroy nature for the better sake of saving the climate, we have not done what we should. We need to strike the right balance, and that needs to be done at the point of investment. But if we are going to solve the inequality of wealth in the world at the same time as we solve the climate crisis and with the same means of paying money from one part of the world to the others, if that is taken too far, it will hinder solving the climate crisis. So the answer is it is needed, it is ambitious, it can technically be done. We need to take all the considerations along the way and do as much as we can, but within reasons when it comes to biodiversity, and also ensure that it's fair but not be locked up in not being able to produce renewable energy because we are not able to transfer enough money in other ways to the poor parts of the world. There's a balance also there.
Thank you. Do you have anything to add?
But absolutely very important and important question and delicate balance, I would say. Then again, coming from an energy-intensive business, I would say that the answer to our transformation to decrease the carbon emissions is really electrifications, and it will be for also many other sectors like transportation and so on. But at the same time, I think that there's also reason and possibilities to look into how can we be more energy efficient when doing this. And that is also what we are trying to do now when converting our sites into electric arc furnaces and so on. We will actually reduce the amount of energy that we consume. But of course, we are changing from an energy source that is emitting CO2 emissions with coal and coke and then moving over to fossil-free energy. So, but of course, a very delicate question.
Yeah.
I can also add, it doesn't help to produce 11,000 megawatts more electricity. It also needs to be consumed and in such a way that we actually replace the fossil fuel. If it's just added on top of the fossil fuel, it's not helping the climate at all. So it's an equally, maybe bigger challenge to rebuild the industry like you are doing. That's probably as tough as a challenge as producing the electricity itself.
I noticed that steel was marked red in IEA's, that steel was marked as a red sector in the IEA report. How can you change that?
Yeah, exactly. And I thought I needed to talk to Vanessa after this, perhaps to explain a little bit on what we're doing. But I give you right in the sense that last year we were only able to produce 500 tons of fossil-free steel. So that's, of course, a very, very small part of the full steel that is provided in the world. But I would like to still come with a positive message that we now know that there is a technique for decarbonizing the steel industry. And now it's about how quickly we can move forward, but also that there is a market for this. I could absolutely say that if we had converted more of our sites, we would definitely have a take on this. And for the 40,000 tons of SSAB Zero that we were able to produce for this year, we have definitely had customers and an interest for that. But now it's very much to work together with the society, to work together with the energy industry, because we cannot do this alone. We need to work in this in value chains. We need to work together with the society. This is truly a shift, a paradigm shift. And that's not for single companies to solve by themselves. We need to find the ways together. And I could just give you an interesting number, actually. If you just look at the need for EU to rebuild the renewable energy sources that they're looking for in their plans. So that will actually require 74 million tons of steel. And let's hope that could be then fossil-free steel rather than steel that is emitting.
So thank you. I think we need to wrap up. And I think it's good to do that on a positive note where we know that what we can do it, but we need to speed up the pace.
In Statkraft, we have modeled the whole energy system in the whole world until 2050 with all countries. And in our modeling, it is possible to reach 2-degree warming. It is not as good as 1.5, and every decimal we can get below 2 is needed. But 2 is much, much better than 3 or 4. So we are moderately optimistic on a 2050 perspective that the world can actually get there. But for that reason, to push for 2030, which is what our generation should concentrate on now, is extremely important. Having the long view that to develop new technologies, like you are explaining, will have a much more impact towards 2050 than towards 2030. But then they need to be fully developed by 2030. So therefore, we need a push now.
May I just add then, in the same way as we are now trying to industrialize this until 2026 and 2030, we are actually also looking for a patent for this technique. So we could license it to the point that we actually need to work together also with developing countries.
So I think we should give all the panelists a warm applause. Thank you to Tiffany Vass, Viktoria, Karsberg, Christian Rynning-Tønnesen, and Dean Cooper, but also to the listeners both in the room and online. There will be a new event here in the Nordic Pavilion in 30 short minutes, but we at Nordic Energy Research thank you for participating and welcome you back here in the Nordic Pavilion on Tuesday, when we will have several events on the 5th of December when we have the Energy Day. So thank you.